that's the last panel for today and for the colloque also. So the Armenian Diaspora and Stateless Power. C'est une table ronde collective and about the book, The Armenian Diaspora and Stateless Power, Collective Identity in the Transnational 20th Century. Our panelists, our speakers, Professors Talar Chahinian, Sosi Kasbarian, Solin Nalbantian, Boris Adjemian, Karen Jallatyan, Generek, Vahe Sahakyan, and Professor Tölölyan.
We're delighted to present our new book at this wonderful conference. This collection showcases some of the exciting work being done in Armenian diaspora studies that has been on full and glorious display at this colloquium this past 2 days. It is truly an exciting time to be in this field, to be working in different disciplines, diverse geographical locations on a wide range of case studies, whilst having intersecting concerns and sharing common questions. We thank the organisers, Anush, Jan, Alen and Boris, and their teams here today for all the hard work that has gone into this conference and for bringing us together as an intellectual community and for this valuable opportunity to engage with our collective work, build networks, start new conversations, and indeed continue discussions that sometimes span decades. For everyone on this panel, our work would not have taken the shape and paths that it has taken without the oeuvre of Tölölyan, the pioneer of Armenian diaspora studies and a pioneer of diaspora studies as a field. The founding editor of the journal Diaspora, author and public intellectual of the Armenian diaspora, he has been hugely influential in our research and intellectual paths, as well as mentor and friend. Our book, The Armenian Diaspora and Stateless Power, Collective Identity in the Transnational 20th Century, was published by IB Tauris and Bloomsbury Press a few months ago as part of the series Armenians in the Modern and Early Modern World. Our book is dedicated to Khachik in recognition of his foundational work in the field and his continuing exciting theorization of the Armenian diaspora and Armenian diaspora studies. Each contributor in this book grapples with key concepts or framings that Khachik has coined as a prism for their research, and each chapter speaks to the others in a lively, multidisciplinary polyphony. We're very grateful to meet here in person as the 3 editors of the book, Talar Chahinian, Solin Nalbantian, and myself, and actually meeting for the first time since we started the project 4.5 years ago. Together with several of the contributors, Karen Jallatyan, Vahe Sahakyan, and Boris Adjemian, together with Tölölyan, to present this book. I will ask each of the Roundtable contributors to speak for a few minutes, after which we will also have a few minutes for discussions between ourselves and also to take any questions that come up. Thank you.
Thanks, Sosi. So I just want to briefly talk about how we actually came together through this volume. And this coming together really mirrored the very coalescing of the volume itself. So first, Sosi, Talar, and we came together as editors. And we had known and worked with each other in various forms, and of course, Talar and Sosi as editors of the journal Diaspora. And actually, Sosi and Talar were both involved in 2 pivotal workshops that I participated in the beginning of my career. The first, the UCLA Grad School Colloquium on Armenian Studies, and Shushan as well. And then the second, a workshop on diasporas in the Middle East at the University of Edinburgh that Sosi organized with a colleague. So that we could come together 10 years later at UCLA as part of the Diaspora and Stateless Power Conference, and then to edit this volume that grew out of this conference has really been a very special experience and really demonstrated just how connected we 3 are, but also with the contributors of the volume. So then it's about the volume itself. And so the volume came together as editors and contributors in the midst of a period of protracted crises. So the COVID-19 pandemic, also the 2020 Karabakh War, and then it was only published a few weeks after the fall of Karabakh and the creation of another diasporic community. So we were all, of course, affected by this pain, but some of our contributors really bore more acute pain, and we want to really acknowledge their work through this trauma. And then we also came together through Khachik. And here I'm not actually just talking about the personal, but really through his prolific work. Many of us would not have known each other, or we would not have been in conversation with each other's work had it not been, frankly, for our differing interventions of Khachik's work. And herein, for me and for all of us on the table as editors, herein really lies another yet unrecognized impact, I think, of your legacy, Khachik. Your ability to mentor and connect people of vastly different fields and research interests. We as historians, sociologists, comparative theorists, anthropologists, we now identify and connect to each other's subfields actually through your work. So I want to thank you for that. I find that a particularly special experience that was molded over the past few years. And thank you all for being here to celebrate this.
We're really excited that the kind of official launch and our gathering, our physical gathering, is happening within the framework of this particular conference. And I'd like to invite us at the closing of this conference to reflect on the title for a moment, Diasporas in Motion. Diaspora is a formation of dispersal and inherently carries the idea of movement within it. And then to pair that with motion, I think, is very exciting and interesting to think about. And within that, this book project fits really nicely in the sense that it's this very idea of diaspora as both an object of study or as a conceptual category that is defined through its porous, malleable, perpetually shifting boundaries that Khachik, on this idea that Khachik has founded the Journal of Diaspora in 1991 and helped shape a field that was equally multi-directional in its reach. It's through his work that we all, as contributors in working through this project, have found the groundwork, essentially, that allow us to make linkages and intersections and really push boundaries and move ideas and understand ideas in motion. And I'd like to just pull out some key nodes of movement or ideas that are in motion in this way that our contributors reflect on, and that also form the organizing logic of our volume, as you may see in some of the subtitles. Through his work, what Khachik has showed us is that as Armenian studies scholars, I think this is particularly important, is that our personal sort of position as thinking subjects coming to a particular area of work in the Armenian diaspora and thinking through it, we can sort of tap in to that very position and sort of push back and push against the empirical research that we're pairing it with, and have these two nodes be in conversation with each other. Through his work, he's showed us that we can think about these theoretically complex ideas of diaspora in English, sort of the language of, or the languages of our academic sort of circles and institutions, and also in Armenian. And I'm thinking about the essays that he's written that are compiled together as Spurki Mech, as just one example. This idea of mobility that diaspora studies in general, transnational studies, finds inherent to our understanding of diaspora. He's showed us or pointed us in the direction of thinking about diaspora as also sedentary, the rootedness in the local that these formations can have. the idea of diasporas being theorized as the other of nation states, and he sort of asked us to think about how there is also stateless power functioning in the realm of diaspora and through diaspora that could be just as restrictive as perhaps, or prohibitive in his words, as the power of the state. And finally, and I think this is an important one for this particular context of an Armenian studies understanding of diaspora or approaches of diaspora, asking us to maybe look beyond the academic discussions of diaspora or the theoretical, and also tap into, in our research and thinking about the discourse produced by diaspora, of diasporans, and inviting us to think about the public intellectuals and elites and those who are producing narratives and approaches to diaspora. So we find ourselves together as a generation of scholars, and through this work, like Solin said, peers, and came together in this project. And I think you know, what's interesting about these shifting boundaries and the boundaries in motion in our thinking is that we also are in are products of academia when disciplines were having sort of reshaping themselves as disciplines, refashioning their own borders. And I see myself as a product of that refashioning and borders in motion in that way. And I think it's interesting that we came together in this project.
So we are already running out of time. And but the good news is that I didn't prepare anything, so I will cut it short. I will try. And you will be indulgent because, as you know, I was quite busy in the past weeks and months. So thank you very much for creating this roundtable, and also this opportunity to work together around the work of Khachik. This was really a great experience to be invited to this conference in 2019 in UCLA. So it was really great. And in a way, this conference is also in the same continuity of the last conference. So I have to be brief. First thing, when I tried to work a long time ago about Armenians in Ethiopia, so I worked as a kind of independent scholar. In French, we would say historien du dimanche, Sunday historian. And I was not, I didn't believe at the time that the anecdotes I had collected on the field would one day raise the interest of any scholar. But now I know that at least one got it, because Khachik wrote a wonderful preface for the forthcoming edition in English of my formerly published book. And at the time, so when I started a PhD, long after doing my research in Ethiopia, I finally decided to do a PhD, and my advisor was regularly telling me, okay, it's very interesting, but you apparently didn't read anything about diaspora studies. So I'm not myself a specialist in diaspora studies, but you should at least show that you master the literature. I was saying, okay, I started to read some diaspora studies, but each time I open a book or read an article, they don't speak about the same thing that I'm working on. Because I was working about people who were in Ethiopia. They were never asking themselves if they were diasporans, Armenians. They were Armenians, they were Ethiopians. It was not that important. So I was not, if I was reading, for example, what Martin Hovhanessian had written about French Armenians, it was not the same questions. And if I was reading a diaspora literature, I was confronted to questions like, is it a diaspora? What are the criteria to define a diaspora? this was clearly not my issue. Finally, one day, I read an article by a certain Hachik Tölölyan, whom I didn't know. And this article was about restoring the logic of the sedentary to diaspora studies. And I can tell you, it has been a revelation for me. And for the first time in my work, I had the feeling that someone was speaking about the same thing than me. So, so for me, it was a kind of revelation, and perhaps it gave me the key for my work into this study on this Armenian diaspora in Ethiopia. And later on, I tried to dig again in this idea of the sedentary when I was studying Armenian diaspora in France. When I'm interested now by Armenian diaspora in Jerusalem, still I have this line, you know, this string of what is the sedentary. And one day, I also heard that Albert Einstein said that in your life, in his life, man or woman can have one idea, sometimes two. Me, I had one. And I'm not Albert Einstein, so I will think it's enough for me.
All right, thanks everyone. So first of all, I'm happy to thank the editors for this volume, for involving me with it. I was not at the UCLA conference, but I'm very happy to be part of the volume. It's a great honor. It's also an honor, in particular, to work in a volume that honors and underlines and engages with Professor Tölölyan's work. So it's a great honor for me to be part of this. I will say 2 or 3 words about the essay that I have in the volume. It's very nice that I already spoke about Vahe Oshagan, so I don't have to say too many things. But basically, the text that I have deals with his poetry, and it tries to sort of like develop a reading that, on the one hand, sort of like plays with Oshagan's idea of the Armenian diaspora, or diasporas in general, being independent from the nation states. He was very provocative, and sometimes one might see a little bit too provocative in announcing these propositions. Vahe Oshagan was, because at the time Armenia was just becoming independent, and there was a whole mobilization around the first Artsakh war and the self-determination movement, etc. But he insisted on the independence of the Armenian diaspora for some at the worst moment in the Armenian world. Generally speaking, I try to, the reason why, basically, kind of in a personal note, I do this work is because I see the Armenian diaspora as a creative space. And I think Professor Tölölyan, our generation of scholars, Vahe Oshagan, many others, see the diaspora as a wonderful, creative, exciting place, not the kind of thanatological discourse that has existed around the diaspora for too long. So I'm excited, I'm happy to do this work, and I hope to continue. I hope the editors will allow me to publish this essay, republish it in some new form, hopefully, in the book that I'm writing that I mentioned on Vahe Oshagan. But once again, I want to thank my colleagues in this panel for having me with them. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would like to share the thank you for the editors, because it was wonderful to work with you throughout the process of, I know you were overwhelmed by reading and reading and reading again and making your comments, and it was really good. Those were really helpful comments. So in my chapter, I would like to return to the idea to revelations. I think start from revelations. Yes, Hachik's writings were revelations in many ways for my scholarship, so I'm not going to even go there, because I was spent all my time on revelations only. But mainly through Hachik, also I got revelations to scholars like Stuart Hall, to Paul Gilroy, because he was in my dissertation committee, and he sent me a list for readings for one of my preliminary exams, which included all these names, and I had no idea about them. I started reading, and that was a more complicated and complex layer of revelations that began opening for me, and it doesn't have an end. I'm still going into that direction. I don't know how much I will go there. But yeah, all those different insights have helped my thinking about, which is in part demonstrated in this chapter, because this chapter actually benefits from two sorts of theoretical revelations, let me use that word again. Foucault's notion of governmentality and Khachik Tölölyan's writings on exile governments, government of exiles, government in exiles, and stateless power, of course. So I used this concept to finally be able to explain what happened in the 20s and 30s when all of us, I'm sure, know some versions of those stories of the Soviet and anti-Soviet, the struggles within France, within America, in all these communities between Dashnak Tsutsun and their supporters on the one hand, which were the anti-Soviet camp, so-called, and the pro-Soviet or Armenia camp, which was all the others, basically. So this period, I used these two concepts, and actually it helped me to use the Armenian case to actually make a small contribution to the debates, discussions on diasporic governmentality. Most of the studies that I've read on diasporic governmentality either deal with the policies of a standing state and suggest governmentality as one of the ways in which states should approach their diasporas and try to govern their diasporas, or they focus on a single diasporic institution and trying to understand how a diasporic institution extends its power over dispersed populations. My approach was that there's always multiple actors in the field of governmentality trying to expand their influence over different diasporic groups and populations. In this case, my examples were Committee to Aid Armenia, Հայաստանի Օգնության Committee, the chapters of HOKE that began establishing in France and the United States in the 20s and expanding in the 30s, and the Dashnak Tsutsun. Of course, they had many supporters. The Hanchakyans, the Ramkavar, supported the HOKE activism in various places, and the Dashnak Tsutsun were mostly excluded from these activisms, but they had their own internal struggles, like France. Many of you, I spoke with people here, you still have the family members of the Martgotsakan movement. That was the split within the Dashnak party, right? That happened in France because the party members, rank and file, couldn't actually take the anti-Bolshevik of the former leaders of the Republic of Armenia. And they were, oh no, we're not anti-Bolshevik, we're anti-Turkish, we should be anti-Turkish. So those sorts of events that happened within a single party, again, complicate a singular approach that there is a policy designed somewhere above and then implemented down the ranks. So as I was trying to explain this with Foucault's notion of governmentality and Khachik's approach to governments of exiles, I noticed that both the Dashnak Tsutsun and HOKE used very similar strategies. So these strategies included discursive construction of Armenian collective needs. For the HOKE and the Soviet government of Armenia, the discourse was this: Armenia is the new homeland of all Armenian workers. They were trying to do two things: send money to Armenia for reconstruction projects and come to live in Armenia. All Armenian workers, no Dashnaks. They were excluding the Dashnaks in the process. That was the ideology. The Dashnak Tsutsun constructed the same on ideological level, a contrasting discourse. Independence of Armenia has to be restored. They maintained the symbolism of the Republic of Armenia, the tricolor flag, all the other attributes, and they were trying to mobilize the masses around the idea of independence, restoring the independence of Armenia. The second tactic that they both used was creating local chapters everywhere, wherever there were Armenian populations. HOKE began establishing different chapters. HOKE began creating youth groups, began publications in France. They were sending different propaganda materials to America, to France, everywhere. They were using local supporters, like from the Hanchakyans, the Ramkavar papers, newspapers, their local organizations. And the Dashnak Tsutsun did the same within their own circles. But that was enough. The third strategy was try to expand over the established Armenian spaces. These struggles were especially turned in more violent in the US, where they both tried to exert more influence over the Armenian General Benevolent Union, which was neutral, but it eventually became a part of these conflicts, became involved because the Soviet, the Bolshevik leadership tried to bring all the money of the AGB to Armenia, and they had their own plans, of course. They began affecting the local compatriotic unions. Some of the compatriotic unions in America split because of the conflicts, and also the Armenian church and the tragic events that happened in the 30s in America. I explain those with these struggles. Otherwise, without the theoretical and this approach, it would be impossible for me to find an impartial base from which to explain what happened in America and why the primate was killed as a result of these governmental power struggles. And I want to end here. Thank you.
Well, Hemingway once wrote a letter to a correspondent and said, "I'm sorry this is so long. I don't have the time to make it short." I'm in the same situation. I owe a debt of gratitude, especially to the Three Musketeers over there, but to everybody who's here that I've corresponded with. All of you know that I am an email fanatic. It is my preferred mode of communication, and I have learned a lot from a lot of people who are here. Some with whom I was on panels, like I and Simon Payaslian and others. So I feel my original profession is comparative literature. In comparative literature, you study something called the humility topos. It was created during the Renaissance as a way in which a writer who was financed by a leading aristocrat would thank the leading aristocrat, apparently by saying, "I'm just not worthy. I'm just not worthy. You're so great to have treated me like this." One can feel sincerely that I'm not worthy, but at the same time be elated by all of these comments. And I feel both of those things, both not worthy and very energized by these comments, and I hope to continue my work. That's all I'll say about honoring me. Then I will say about the essay that I contributed to the volume. First, I'll say, get the volume. It is the best, most contemporary, most timely summary of the issues that at the moment are formulating the debate of the Armenian diaspora. And I'm not saying that because I have an essay in it. It really is. It's a wonderful book. I would say to those of you who get the book that you should read Karen Jallatyan's piece about many things, but including a little piece about me, in which he criticizes my approach to things. That would be animating, because we have large chunks of agreement among us, and that's, of course, gratifying. But there are also criticisms to be made, both of my own work and of each other's work. And I think Karen's piece, for example, in a part of it, is about that. Not primarily about Vayoshagan, of course, but even there I feel a certain sense of community. Vayoshagan and I have known each other for most of my life and for the last 50 years of his life. So what did I say in my chapter with the core assignment? My principal beginning for that was things I've written before. It's a separation between two terms. Diaspora studies, this is an academic discipline or subdiscipline. It appeared around the time that Diaspora Journal started being edited, and contributed to that. You know how it is. Very often there's something happening, and then you do something because you're influenced by what is happening, and then you then help the stuff to happen. For example, Professor Gevorkyan was talking about how there was an interest developing in diaspora finance. He got involved in diaspora financing, and his own interest powered that work even further. It's the kind of thing that happens, and that's what happened to me. I mean, I obviously was influenced by the ferment in the Armenian diaspora. I wrote some articles on Armenian terrorism at the invitation of political scientists who said, "What the hell are you people doing?" And I said, well, there's no excuse, but there's an explanation. And that's how I started explaining the Armenian diaspora to non-Armenians. And at some point I realized that there are two kinds of things going on. One is the emergence of this thing called diaspora studies, which is a multidisciplinary endeavor which takes place at the university level. And it has its own validity, there's no doubt about that. But the other thing that I felt was neglected, was overlooked, was what I called, to balance the terminology, the study of diasporas. And the study of diasporas is work done primarily by artists, above all artists, I would say, and intellectuals, who, although they are not writing as academic scholars, they're actually thinking hard about the Armenian diaspora, or any diaspora, of course. This is true of the intellectuals of any diaspora. Artists and intellectuals are the others. They're not scholars, but they're the others who shape, create, think about, criticize, mobilize their diasporas. And I felt that we Armenians have not paid enough attention to our own study of diasporas. And then I started realizing that although I could contribute to that in some way, and I still hope to, I can't really, because I am not a child of the digital age. And the major space now where the public sphere of the Armenian diaspora is functioning is online. And that takes the kind of energy and savvy that the young have. Professor Lundgren's mention of how, quoting Anahit, saying, we young can do it because we have a lot of energy and we're digital. What the next stage is going to be is to follow the old media, the few influential newspapers that are left, but also to delve deep, deep, deep into the internet, to create a study of the diaspora, to create studies of diaspora as a valid part of the knowledge that we pursue. And those of you who have read I think, let me see, when is the public sphere book, 1962? Habermas, I think in 1962, I forget the date, wrote a very, very influential, wonderful study of 64. Thank you, of the public sphere in England, emerging not in the halls of Parliament, not in universities as exalted as Cambridge and Oxford, but in a particular kind of space that we would call tavern or bar or restaurant. If you don't know the work, it's worthwhile. And I think now the tavern, the bar, the restaurant, the public space, the square is digital. And what we need, what I would call for, is the expertise of people who've studied diaspora studies and who now explore the study of diasporas as conducted digitally in public, in the digital world. That's for the next generation. I know these remarks are not very well focused, but that is part of what I was trying to do in the article that's in the collection. The other part is a covert argument that I've been having with friends for decades. At my age, everything's for decades. And it's about when Armenians started thinking of themselves not as temporarily expelled from the homeland, either because of attacks and war, or because of financial reasons, whatever, economic reasons. But when they started thinking, oh my God, we're something else now. We're no longer at the home. And both the elite started thinking of its people that way, and the people started thinking of themselves that way. So I was trying to do this by a very, very elementary study of terms like Bantucht, Nejdeh, Tsuronk, eventually Spürk, but Spürk comes quite late. Some of you may know that the first time the word Spürk, which is diaspora in Armenian, the first time it appears, it's actually not as Spürk. It's actually the root word of Spürk, which is SPR, same word as in spore and diaspora, old Indo-European word. It appears in an encyclical by an Armenian Catholicos addressing those of his flock who no longer live in Armenia, who have become refugees in the western parts of Armenia, mainly the Byzantine Empire. So that I think that if you follow the vocabulary and the expressions that accompany the vocabulary, you see that Armenians started thinking themselves, large chunks of Armenians, not all Armenians, as diaspora, long before diaspora studies, long before the word Spürk became the Armenian word for diaspora. And I think that it's necessary to look at that because we have constructed a myth of ourselves, understandably. This is not a condemnation. We've constructed a myth of ourselves as in the homeland until the genocide and then not in the post-genocide diaspora. In fact, we've been emigrating for a variety of reasons for a long time, and my point is not correcting history. My point is saying the mentality of the Armenian became diasporic starting in the 11th, 12th centuries, and we have not checked our tradition from 12th century to the 1914 to see how much diasporicity shaped our own understanding of ourselves without our naming it. Okay, I think I've talked more than enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Tölölyan, and to all the Roundtable contributors. We have a copy of the book here if anybody would like to have a look at it. We're especially grateful to the Gulbenkian Fund that enabled the simultaneous production of the ebook, the hardback, and a very affordable paperback as well. So thank you to them. Do we have time for some questions, Boris?
Thank you very much. This is an academic conference, and I'm a lapsed academic. You are all current academics. But I do want to highlight one thing that through academia, because you all praised Khachik's work and his impact on academic scene. I also want to highlight that Khachik has been tremendously important and significant to those of us who are outside of academia or have left academia, and those ideas, the diaspora-centric ideas, diaspora ideas, actually have an impact on policy, have an impact on how institutions think. So I just want to take a very brief moment to also highlight that outside of academic world, there is also very important work that's being done. And just to end on an anecdote, how the diaspora actually functions. Some years ago, I had an intern to whom I asked to write in Portugal, this is in Lisbon, to write a small comparative essay as her master's thesis comparing the Portuguese diaspora and the Armenian diaspora. And she said, fine, she hadn't heard of the Armenian diaspora, so I told her what to read, gave Khachik's articles. 2 days later, I get an email from Khachik saying, who's this person? Apparently there is someone in Lisbon who's downloading all of my articles. Who is this person? Do you know? I said, yes, I do know. So this is how diaspora networks function. Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to say, thank you, Razmik. I want to say that part of what drove me, and I think not just me, but me as a representative of the field of diaspora studies as it was emerging, is that I went from Armenian spyrk, which I had worked on, had written about in Armenian for a long time, to diaspora in English, of course because of academia, but also in part because the word transnational had emerged. And I'd become interested in that, because if you're an Armenian of a certain kind, my background, the nation, the Usk, is right there from your childbirth on. I'm not exaggerating, childbirth on. They sing you songs of Armenia before you can understand Armenian. So I suddenly saw this term, transnational. And of course I knew the terms, all of us know the terms, international, it's been around since Jeremy Bentham. Multinational, it's been around since British and American firms started spreading in the world at the end of the 19th century. I thought, transnational, what is this? So on the one hand, I did an extended study of how the term transnational emerged. I can recite that to you, but it didn't mean what it means now. But the other, I was entranced is only a slightly exaggerated term for, oh my God, this explains to me why I feel the way about Armenians. I don't feel that we're an Usk in the sense that I was told we were an Usk. I don't feel that we were a nation in the sense I was told we were a nation. What I feel, and I wrote something about transnational, and I said, we're an Antrusk. We are a transnation. Of all the things I've written, that has gotten the most reaction from other Armenians. What do you mean we're an Antrusk? We're an Usk. No, we're an Antrusk. And I would actually say that what has fertilized my thought is trying to talk about how we've gone from, one way of thinking about us is that we are a nation and it's diaspora. But another way of thinking about it is that we're a transnation, and that this term has to be given meaning. It can't just be rhetorical. And if I lived another 20 years, which I won't, I would like to work on transnation. And today and yesterday, many of the talks given here touch on that without actually explicitly saying that. That is to say, they talk about how there's no eternal nation, there's no eternal diaspora, there's performance, there's creativity, there's struggle, and it recreates the nation in new ways. The new way the Armenian nation is being recreated, the only way it's going to endure is as a transnation. And I think the book is the beginning of it can serve as a platform for thinking the transnation. And I think that would be not only good for us, it would be good, frankly, it sounds terrible, for the world, because a lot of people are going to exist as trans nations. It's not just us, of course. Thank you.
Anaïd, je vous en prie.
If I may, it is not a question, more a reaction. So thank you to the organizer for this great opportunity to think and to meet all the, on this issue about the diaspora. I was not able to attend the whole conference, and I apologize for this, but I just noticed that language issues were quite absent in the conference. So this is a great multidisciplinary conference. The book also is multidisciplinary, but we don't see any work in social linguistics. And I think it's a little bit a pity because, yesterday Simon Payaslian and Vache Sahakyan began by pointing out the gap that exists in the Armenian diaspora between the representations about the identity and the real practice, between a kind of karatsats, I don't know how to say it in English, fixed representations and past-oriented representations about identity, vs new, what said now Khachik, performance-oriented and future-oriented approaches. And it was, I'm sure it's not what both Vache and Simon believe, but in the way you were speaking about it, it was like the language is definitely associated with the old school approach, with the Karatsats one, with the something that there's no place for the language in the innovative approach of the diaspora. Maybe you are right. Maybe we will lose the language, but for now, I think it's a pity not to speak about some great initiatives, because I think that something changed since, I will say, the last decade. Because a lot of initiatives are launched by people, and so many times it was issued from networks created due to the Gulbenkian foundations, and I am very grateful, because really what we were able to do together them changed totally my vision about Western Armenian. Can you imagine that I was working 30 years with Grigor Beledian in the same Department of Armenian Studies, and we were always speaking French between us. And it's only after the 2015 conference that we just, it interned in my software that it is possible to do it another way. Why? Just because we organized a conference in which we decided to do simultaneous translation to and from Armenian too. And that was just a kind of revolution. And after this, there was a lot of projects, and so I will not list them, because I don't want to give the impression that I want to do a promotion of anything. But really, there is a kind of new movement in this direction, and I think that it is early to resign about Western Armenian language. And I think that really just Western Armenian language can play a role in this, because if we want to keep Armenian language just to remain Armenian, I think that it's more pragmatically, it's better to choose Eastern Armenian. It's easier, you can have immersion, you have all the good conditions and so on. So if we want to invest to keep Western Armenian, which is a huge investment, it is to do the Western Armenian the vector for this new way of being a diaspora. I'm sorry, because I have been too long and I don't want to.
Thank you. I think that's part of a wider discussion that we would love to continue, and indeed we have started. Just a quick note from the perspective of the book. We had at least one contributor on language who unfortunately had to drop out. As Solin said, we were putting this book together in a period of various crises, and unfortunately that meant that a few of our original contributors and chapters, which included the language topic specifically, were not able to go forward for those reasons. Does anybody? They shall remain nameless.
Thank you for your comments. Actually, I don't want to be misinterpreted that my presentation. Yeah, I can see that, and I was speaking to Jallatyan like before this session. We had a little conversation there, and I tell to everyone when I talk about the transcultural Armenianness that, and my intention is to bring these other Armenian experiences that have been for decades neglected and ignored as sufficiently Armenian. I'm not trying to downplay the efforts that are there and the wonderful efforts that are there to preserve and expand the Armenian-speaking spaces and the efforts for the preservation and for making Western Armenian a language of everyday interaction, a simple language, not just the language that we can talk only the Azgain issues that Talar wonderfully writes in her book. Yes, so I don't want to make that impression that it's not important for me. But I found these other Armenian experiences too that have been neglected for decades, and I think I found a theoretical concept to also bring our attention to these other experiences too that exist beyond language. Because in my conviction, and this is a firm conviction coming from comparative studies and diaspora studies theories and scholarship, diasporas don't speak one language. They have multiple languages. No matter how much efforts we put, Western Armenian, Eastern Armenian, or any Armenian will be just one of the many languages of the diaspora. So let's face that fact and let's admit that. That's the point I'm trying to make. But this is no way should be interpreted as preaching for not preserving, for giving up. No, that's not absolutely not it. I just wanted to clarify this, that my point is not that. Thank you.
So, no. Please, Professor.
Okay. I want to tell you a very brief anecdote. About 20 years ago, I was invited to France, to the Sorbonne, along with a bunch of other people, to have a conference about diasporas. It was put together by a woman who was very prominent, I think in sociology. Professor Bruno may correct me, maybe I have the discipline wrong. Her name was Dominique Schnapper. Elle est sociologue, n'est-ce pas?
Oui, et spécialiste de la diaspora.
And we sat, scholars from many countries, and she said, these proceedings will be conducted in French. This is the Sorbonne. Durkheim lectured in this hall. French government requires us to have this conference in French. You have been provided with simultaneous translation. Simultaneous translators struck, and she turned to me and she said in the afternoon session, you translate from now on. And that was my job for the rest of the conference. But why am I telling you the anecdote? Not because of me. Because that was France 20 years ago. Today, whether it's wonderful or shameful, I don't know, we're conducting this in English. Every nation except the English-speaking ones have language anxiety. They have the language anxiety for understandable reasons. As they say, when the pilot flies from Beijing to Moscow, the pilot doesn't talk to the tower in Russian or Chinese. He talks in English. We are in the presence of an imperial language and an imperial power. And the question is how we find our own space, how we make our own spaces nationally and transnationally within it. That's the effort. I don't feel any guilt about this. I've written a lot in Armenian. To speak in Armenian is a particular pleasure for me, but I work inside the empire, and guess what? So do you all.
Bravo, bravo, bravo.